Mic check, mic check. All right, good evening, everyone. It is April 15th at 5:30 p.m. We will be officially calling to order the Learning and Teaching Committee meeting. I believe we have no citizens' comments, so we will move right into a PLC update. I believe Dr. Igo has some information to share with us.
Yeah, so over the last 2 months, we've had the opportunity to watch a short video clips of either teachers discussing how those PLCs have impacted the work or the opportunity to watch a PLC in action. And this month, we don't necessarily have a video, but I just wanted to take a few minutes to share some successful data that we have with the board. So in January, all our high school students, with the exceptions of our seniors, took the Common Lit benchmark assessment. That benchmark assessment really helps us dig into standard by standard. Where are kids at and where do we need to continue to provide support? Our sophomores, or grade 10 or English 10, spent a little bit of time using that Common Lit resource, probably more so than our English 9. And they saw an 8-point increase from January to March. So we're really kind of stepping back and celebrating that again, when we get really focused in on what are those standards and we provide that just the right type of high quality instructional materials to help kind of push those PLCs, we can really start to see some really good some impact for kids. That would be a great opportunity to share.
That's great news. Certainly this board loves to hear about increases in academic performance. So thank you for that. Tonight for discussion, we have several different resource recommendations that we'll be following up on. And so item 2A, social studies resource recommendations, grades 6 through 12.
Yeah. So before I introduce our presenters this evening, I just want to kind of put some of the stuff that we're doing tonight. So we're really going to be talking about recommending tonight some high quality materials, particularly for our students in grades 6 through 12 in the areas of social studies, science, and French. The committees have used the new updated CAI process to engage in this work, and that is how they have brought forth their recommendations this evening. What's really important and what I really want to point out before we really dive in is that this work, the idea of this high quality instructional material using as our foundation is the first step towards having instructional coherence and, more importantly, that guaranteed and viable curriculum for the classroom. This is really our first step into making that work happen. With that, I would like to welcome our department chairs, as well as Monica Bailey, who have been leading the CAI process across the year and are really going to talk to us a little bit about how that process worked, as well as what are their final recommendations.
Hello, my name is Dr. Monica Bailey, and I'm a teacher on special assignment at Learning and Teaching. This is actually my 27th year in the school district, and most recently I was a social studies teacher at North High School. I'm joined at the table with our department chair at North High School in social studies. This is Mike Zernoni, and our department chair of social studies at East High School. This is Andy Earhart. We are going to go through an overview of some of our curriculum process up to this date. Some course pathways. We're going to, of course, share that resource recommendation, our professional learning plan, and our next steps, all of which we're very excited about. As always, we anchor our work in our core values of belonging, perseverance, and achievement. We've talked a lot in our social studies teams about what we mean by excellence and what we mean by achievement. And so this has really been a great foundation for the work that we do. Additionally, as Dr. Igo mentioned, this really focuses on the instructional coherence, how we look at the students' pathways through social studies, grades 6 through 12, and how our work really helps each other as students emerge and into a pathway of their choice in post-secondary planning. So we want to start by reviewing some moments from our social studies CAI process that have been highlights for this school year and last school year when we started. So one of the first steps in our CAI process was exploring the social studies standards and engaging in a D303 visioning process. And to put this in context, this is our planning stage. And our CAI process was triggered by a release of brand new social science standards from the state of Illinois. And the last update had been in 2016. We noticed that the structure of the standards were same, but a lot of the content had shifted and changed. And so starting in the 22-23 school year, the CAI team, which was focused on 9 through 12 at that point, really worked to build an understanding of the intent of these new standards. We attended workshops, we read books together, articles, we took classes together, we deconstructed the new standards, and we really engaged in a process of what this might look like for our students. The final draft of those standards were released by ISB on December of 2023. But it's helpful to understand the dimensions of the Illinois social science standards. And so we kind of look at them in 3 different ways. First, we look at the standards and mandates, and these really are the more discipline-specific content and skills that we need to look at, what actually is to be included in our courses. And then the disciplinary tools and concepts looks at all of the disciplines that comprise the social sciences. So social studies is mixed with civics, economics, geography, and history as our main components, additionally with psychology and sociology. And so we have to look at those specific disciplinary tools. You might hear this in like, read like a historian or analyze like a, in a civic sense. So we kind of switch our lenses depending on the discipline. And finally, our instructional model is the inquiry design model, which is created by the National Council for the Social Studies and adopted by the state of Illinois as the instructional model for our work. So these dimensions all together, along with our strategic plan here in D303, help form a foundation for our vision. I'm going to turn it over to Mike and Andy to talk a little bit about our vision process.
Thanks for having us here today. Appreciate it. So after some of the initial work that we did, we felt it was really important as a unit district to establish a vision so that we as social studies teachers can communicate to our stakeholders what our goals are. And so in a collaborative effort with K through 12 educators and specialists, we came together to establish this vision to kind of help with narrowing the vision down to a shared message for all D303 teachers, students, parents, and community members. It is clear. It's something that teachers can put on their syllabi so that we're all kind of working on the same page. It's inquiry-based, it's discourse and analysis focused, and it really helps us support that guaranteed and viable curriculum that we're emphasizing.
Part of our goal with this message was to make sure that everyone in the community, from our students to staff to community members, know that this is social studies and this is what we do. This is why we do what we do, and the opportunity that we provide to our students. Just that communication and openness with all of our stakeholders we felt was extremely important to bring to the table. And as well as to help guide the professional learning for our educators and have a foundation and have that base layer that we can continue to build upon in each of our disciplines, like I mentioned.
And these are just some of the, not some, these are all of the people who were part of that process. Again, K through 12. And, I think it's really important to have representation from every school, but every grade level. So again, kind of speaking the same language, we're all focusing on the same things. And it was really powerful to have all these people in the room.
We then this year really dug into our design phase. And at that point, we expanded our process to include 6 through 12. So we added middle school in. And the focus of this year was to really look at what resources were going to support the courses in our core content areas, focusing on our graduation requirement classes first. We will reference later when we're going to get into our other classes that we offer. So we're really looking at that scope and sequence for a student that supports their post-secondary planning. And so at this time, you'll see all of the 6 through 12 Social Studies CAI committee listed above. This team is filled with passionate educators. We have representatives from every course, every level of course, special educators, multilingual learner experts, PLC leaders, department chairs, instructional coaches, technology and media specialists. We have tried to involve everybody we can in this process to make sure that we're designing something that is best for our students. And we have several of these members in our audience today. And so we would love for them to be recognized at this time. We want to start our look at the idea of a pathway in kind of a K through 12 vision. I'll let Mike and Andy kind of take some of this lead.
When we first started looking at this process, we ultimately decided with this intentional design to kind of go from a top-down approach opposed to a bottom-up, almost like a backwards design model. Essentially starting to imagine what do we want our students to be able to walk away with by the time they graduate from an ED 303 school. And as they enter into whatever their career and future paths may hold, what are the core values that we as the social sciences want them to embellish and to be able to be successful with. This pathway ultimately starts obviously with elementary school and becomes more specialized as you reach the top of the pyramid, pardon me, especially in regards to our AP and specialized courses. And that's something that we certainly pride ourselves in, is having such a variety of opportunities for our students to go down wherever their pathways may lead. Again, the intentional design model essentially is meant to build that foundation. And hopefully we hope our students grow from there.
Yeah, just to piggyback off that, I think it's just really important to look at just the various options that students have, choices that they have for whatever their future holds post-secondary. It's one of the things that I really love about the social studies curriculum is being able to have different choices. I'm not going to mention that social sciences has a lot of different lenses, be it, civics or history or psychology or sociology. And I hope you guys understand that we provided those options for students, whatever course they take. I think it's rigorous, it's diverse, it's complex. So we're really excited about it.
As we mapped out what our intent was for students through this program, we started looking at what are some resources that can help support our work. What is that backbone that will help us do those things for students to allow them in their post-secondary goals? And so we started to look at our field test process in this design phase. The field test is a new process at the high school level, and we were uncertain at first how this would turn out. And I would have to say, if you talk to anybody, we learned quite a few things that were not what we expected. And so we were very happy, I think, to go through this process. And so we want to kind of just quantify a little bit about the scale of how we tested out these resources. At the middle school level, we asked all social studies teachers, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade to engage in the field test. And you can see that we involve all stakeholders, including a focus on making sure that it works in our core courses, our bilingual courses, and our affinity courses.
So if you can look at the middle school, how many students, educators, members of the community were involved in this process. And if I'm just being really honest with you, this is my 23rd year in the district. I've been through a few curriculum renewals. This is the most in-depth process in terms of resources, and I'm glad that we've done it. These resources were tried by educators who have knowledge of what they're doing. And it's really important that we did that so they can try these things out. Some of them worked, some of them didn't, but we wouldn't have known that had we not gone through this process. So I'm really thankful about that. In years past, we've had people come in and show us the resources, but we didn't know if they were actually going to work once we got into it. And so having them, teachers try that with students, it is going to lead to more knowledge-based informed decision, which I'm really happy about.
This process, as you can see on the screen, essentially we took a 5-step approach to this idea in terms of looking at resources, incorporating those into our PLCs, The collaborative piece, which is the key one I'd like to highlight, looking at data and research that we developed as a result of the field test, and then finally coming up with our evaluation and what we determined would be best moving forward. In terms of resources, each of our PLC teams in our core courses had a chance to select at least one, if not multiple resources to be able to field test. Some of those decisions were made preemptively before we even did the first, and then some of them were made post process because we realized the first one wasn't going to work. So it was really cool actually to be part of that process and to kind of be able to make some of those decisions as needed, and with the support of Monica and Dan and others, and being able to go through that process together. The CAI team then brought those resources that we'd selected to our PLCs, and we used a lot of collaboration during our PLC time during the school day, and on our Wednesday early releases to be able to process, to analyze data, and just have honest conversations about what worked and what didn't work and why, and start to figure out some of what we could use moving forward in that process. And that's really the collaboration piece. One thing that I truly enjoyed in my position as a DC was being able to get into people's classrooms and get into my teachers' classrooms who were doing field tests at that time, and be able to see firsthand what was working, what wasn't working, what could I do to help, and what could we do to make that process better, and ultimately come up with the best decision possible for the benefit of our students. So for me, that third step of this process, I think, was the most important. The data piece then was wonderful to be able to have teacher feedback. We had teachers complete a biweekly survey in terms of their analysis and evaluation. It was interesting to note how sometimes those survey results got better as field tests went on, and sometimes they went the opposite direction. Same thing for student surveys. We were able to regularly check in with our students and ask pretty basic questions, and yet questions that gave us a lot of really good intel and feedback from the student perspective on what they thought about the process and how that was going. And then last but not least, we were able to participate and ultimately make some decisions as a CAI team. The PLCs brought information back to the members of the CAI team, who were then able to make a fairly educated decision on what we think would be best moving forward. So this whole process, like Mike mentioned earlier, was very different than the prior CBT process that we've done. And it was much more inclusive and much more, I think, beneficial for not only our staff, but more importantly, our students.
One thing I just want to make sure I emphasize is this wasn't just CAI members, it was everybody that was teaching that course. So I think that's impactful as well, because they got a voice as well. It wasn't just people that were on this team. We got feedback from students, we got feedback from teachers that were part of teaching that course as well. So again, I think that's really important to know.
In our timeline, which we'll show in a second, we are planning on engaging with AP resources next year, but College Board has released an update to AP Psychology that is effective next year. So we met with our AP Psychology teachers, and so we wanted to include this within our social studies resource presentation. The American Psychological Association updated their standards, which made colleges update their standards, which made College Board update theirs. And so our team likes their current resource. It has worked with kids. So they are just recommending that we update the edition to the 4th edition, which aligns to the new AP test that will be in effect for next school year. The recommended resources will help support our ongoing work. And so we want to share a little bit about our plans for next year. For the courses that really were deeply engaged in the process, which is grades 6 through 8, and then the 9 through 12 College Prep 4 classes are our graduation requirement courses. This summer, our teams are going to finalize their scope and sequence, and then we're going to engage in some professional learning around the content and the skills of the new standards. In the fall, we're going to implement unit launches. And these are those job embedded professional learning where teachers get to really deconstruct the priority standards. They get to look at the assessments. They get to problem solve together to figure out how to make that unit successful for students. We're going to meet with our administrators to kind of look at how they support our educators in their work. And our CAI team will continue to gather feedback. We're going to review that student work and kind of turn into a leadership team. Next summer, we'll analyze the holistic data, we'll refine the curriculum and continue to implement updates and changes. With that, we'll make sure that if we have new educators, we bring them into the fold. We always have opportunities for our curriculum to be reviewed at New Educator Academy and other places. So an ongoing process of making sure as people switch classes at the high school, where they know if they're going to a different course that they haven't taught before, that there is kind of an onboarding for how they can implement that curriculum.
Again, I think one thing I want to highlight here are the unit launches and the reflective piece. Again, this is like been here a while, so I've gone through some of these and this is new. Unit launches are going to be really important where members of the team would get together. You know, a lot of this work is done a year before. So what you think might work 12 months before might not actually work when you're in the middle of it. So or you might not remember thought process. And so I think it's important at the beginning of each unit to kind of roll it out and make sure we are all clear, all on the same page. Okay, this is what our intent was. These are our assessments. This is where we're headed. So I'm excited about that. I'm also excited about the reflective piece. I feel like when we roll something out again, like you can't anticipate things that are going to happen. And so to get that consistent, continual, collaborative, reflective piece, I think is an important part of this puzzle as well.
Yeah, I would add to that as well, that just that ongoing cycle of the CAI process feels very different than a lot of the other curriculum work we've done in prior years. And it feels good. It feels really good to be able to not be stuck with something for the next 5, 6, 7 years and be able to respond proactively to that. So that feels great. Looking ahead, we are also next year going to try to focus on one other core class that is an interdisciplinary course between social studies and our business department. And that's for economics. We'll start with standard level and move up from there. In addition, we will also be evaluating some upcoming resources for our AP courses minus AP Psych that have not gone through any significant changes. And yet some of those resources are now a bit outdated. So we'll start to embark on looking at some of those. And then last but not least, in terms of both our honors and electives courses, in terms of honors, making sure that we're going through the field test process, again, very similar to what we've done with our core classes. Also looking at differentiating that process between what does it mean to be in a standard level course versus an honors level course, and what does that look like? And then with our electives courses, looking at gap analysis of our current offerings. And if there are any courses that we are not currently offering, that maybe they could be pathways that we could pursue in the future that might be beneficial for not only our staff, but our students.
At this point, I'll turn it over to Dr. Igo to speak about the cost proposal for these resources.
Thanks for sharing. It has really been exciting to watch this process unfold in its entirety across the school year. The amount of excitement, is just constantly there. We really appreciate that. So if we take a look at the resources that we're bringing forward, and this is broken down much more succinct or in greater detail in your board memo that you received as well. But you will see there's what we are proposing for 6 years. So this would be 6-year cycles, contracts. And then we've identified the books that we would like. Again, this is based upon having gone through that field test, really thought about and processed through. I think what's probably a piece that field test, we really struggled, or we really emphasized, not struggled, really emphasized how the structural materials are the foundation for building the rest of that work. So the field test ensures that we are picked one that actually works with kids in the classroom. And that we know where there's going to be some bumps in the road, because we also need to acknowledge that there's not a single instructional material out there that can cover it all. And so we need to be very clear about where we need to supplement. And you can see we've identified some supplementary materials in here as well. So in 6th grade, we do some world history, and that's there, and 7th and 8th grade. You'll see some U.S. history with the addition of a civics course. 9-12, you'll see those as well. Our 9th grade resource is actually an open resource, so that's not actually going to cost us any additional funding. And then 11 and for our history and civics courses as well. And then for those supplemental resources that you see up there, these are really to help address some of our instructional mandates, as well as increase the opportunity for kids to engage in that complex, rigorous test. We had talked about how important that is. And then under that, you can kind of see the professional learning plan. And it first starts with that unit writing. So the ZAI team kind of comes back together and they get a unit writing team. And once we have this resource, they use that scope and sequence and they identify. So what's nice about having these high quality instructional materials, there's a lot of information in there, but it's not usually possible to do all of the things. So it's really the job then of these unit writing teams to come together and determine which parts of these are we going to use. And then they mentioned the unit launches, which is before they begin every unit. It's an opportunity to kind of learn what's in that unit, kind of set the pace of how are we going to use this? How are we going to focus on it? What are our next steps? And then there will also be some additional learning that will provide as it relates to instructional practices as well as some mandates, right? So those are the useful mandates. So that provides you with an overall of the cost for running this from 6 to 12.
Just real quick, in the, in the packet, some of them say 6 years and some of them say one time.
But one-time cost.
Is that the 6 years one-time cost that, like, so for example, a human story and influence, 144K for 6 years, is that annual or is that for the whole 6 years? Got it, thank you.
What are the measures of student success that you'll monitor to show student performance improvement or change? What are the benchmarks from which we're starting? What are those measures of success and how will we know once the money is spent that the program is having the desired positive effect on student outcomes?
Sure, great question. So that really goes back to kind of that PLC work. So when they identified those priority standards, the social studies isn't a tested area. So we will be using the common end of unit assessments as they go back to those priority standards and reporting out on how our students doing in making progress towards those standards. And if the resources are not helping us get there, then we will have a conversation, right? That's that, like, at the end of every unit, we reflect. At the end of every year, we reflect. And then we make decisions about, is it something in the resource or is it something not?
So will you and the team bring back a benchmark for this year that says, here's where student performance is for social studies? It doesn't show up, for example, in the SAR today. It's a measure. And so other than B grades and a couple of other
100%.
averages. So what are the measures that you will bring back to the board this year as a benchmark against which we would evaluate the future success of this program?
I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to bring you a benchmark to start from, only in our current process, and feel free to help me out here. In our current system, we don't have those common assessments to know or identify those priority standards prior for us to say, to go apples to apples, if you will. But we can definitely look to see our kids making progress on the priority standards. You think at the end of each unit.
And I'm not sure if this helps, but there are different standards. And so with the update of the standards, we're still operating on the old standards and we'll move to the new standards next year as well. So there's a shift in some of the language and some of the types of assessment suggestions from the new standards.
So then would it be fair to say that the benchmarks will be achieved next year? We'll look at next year's performance as benchmarks
As our
and moving
baseline.
forward from there.
Yeah, I think we could say that would definitely make us, that would be our baseline. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, pretty much is if we're gonna have to establish a baseline somewhere since we don't have one now. Next year, we're gonna have to establish one. Is that, Mr. Lacker, does that answer your question satisfactorily?
Well, I don't know about, could we not, or should we not, though, at least be looking at student performance in terms of grades for like civics, for example, or some of the other classes, or the grade distribution this year and see how it compares to next year?
We could certainly do that. We could certainly do that. Wouldn't necessarily give us information about the resource, but it would let us know whether or not how students are responding within the class.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
just to be perfectly clear, we won't be able to compare. My question was going to be about Cross River. And if we're doing common assessments, and that means it doesn't matter which high school. Am I getting nods on that? Because if that's not happening, right?
Through the CAI process, what we've currently been doing is trying to come up with and create our common Cross River unit assessments, as well as final exams for both semesters, final assessments, not necessarily only an exam or a multiple choice version. So that's something that in the future, then yes, we will be able to use that as kind of a baseline established point. Currently, this year, social studies, we are currently working with through the PLC process in terms of developing both our unit as well as our semester exams or assessments at the end of each semester.
Yeah, most definitely. And this whole process will help align all of that because we worked collaboratively across River. So it is a understanding and expectation that that does happen.
It's great. Both of you have a long time experience. CBT process was good, but it sounds like very strong. It seems to me that implementation is almost from the beginning because of all the people who are involved, so that when it really does roll out, there isn't going to be like, okay, we have 3 days to teach you everything. No, we took 3 years. And I think also with new standards, you're starting fresh. And so I think that's really critical. I'm very excited. It's really nice to hear from folks in the field, how the process is working and the impact it's going to have on kids. I've always wanted to go back to high school just to do social studies. So Dr. Gordon, if I could, so thank you for all your work. It's nice to hear how this is rolling out and the impact it has. And I think the measure of success is really critical for this board. You need to know this is where we are in the weeds. That's what we want. So we just need to be sure that what we look at is apples to apples. So thank you for your
Real quick, what did we see as the biggest set of changes in the standards from what we're currently doing to what the new standards are? Can you guys give a little bit of that, please?
One thing that the state of Illinois did is kind of reframe our standards. And so each of these is about recognizing multiple perspectives within like a certain lens. So if we're looking at, for example, in civics, the previous standard might have just said, examine a governmental process. And now the standard is examine a governmental process through the lens of various populations. And then in parentheses, they list various populations. And so it adds a level of specificity to what the method by which we examine a certain thing. And this does this in history through like some historical perspectives. And then when you add in the additional mandates, it's clear which perspectives we are supposed to be inviting into the learning. So one of the more, I guess, publicized one is the TEACH Act, which is about Asian American history. And so we need to embed Asian American history within our US history courses, both in middle school and high school, in a very affirming way. And we also need to zoom into Illinois and the history of Illinois within Asian American history. And so there are some very specific things that we are kind of re-looking at. What are the questions we're asking students to look at? What are the resources we're using with students? What are the primary source inquiries that we're looking at?
Do you see that as having an impact on the overall amount of like the timeline or the amount of history that we cover? Because again, if you're examining things from multiple perspectives, right, you're going to be spending a lot of time in those particular subjects, right? So what impact do you guys see that having on our overall teaching of what we taught of our timeline before this versus what we teach now?
I would say from a historical perspective, especially as we're thinking about telling story and telling the narrative, These new standards are meant to be more inclusive to help us tell the full story instead of just there's one version of the story and then there's the other story. This is meant to be more inclusive of all components of that story. So I think it'll be naturally embedded more into the curriculum instead of just being something that comes secondarily. It's meant to be more forward moving in that direction.
This graphic might help. One of the things we talked about in the 6-12 process was this idea of what we call like the big to small. And so when we zoom into something like Illinois, and then we go back out to US, and then we go global, and then back to US. And so you should see throughout a spiraling of the curriculum, this kind of in and out. So kids can apply it in a global sense, in a local sense, in a state, in a nation. And so you'll see the sequence of our courses does that. And so in 6th grade, we talked a lot about the 6-12 narrative of where we can make sure that students have access to these core knowledge, because that's a lot of history, and every day we have more history. And so there's always more we could add there. And so in 6th grade, with this focus on world, and then in 7th, there is ISB has been clear that we need to have an entire semester on civics, and we placed it in 7th grade. And so we're doing US history, but again, a focused portion of the timeline so that people can go more in depth. So we don't see students going superficially across, but a chance to dive deep within the content area. And then you'll see the second part of the US history in 8th grade, which aligns to the US history that you see junior year. And so you'll see kind of the global to the, the US stay focused back to a global freshman year with the geography focused courses, back into a US focus, and then into civics.
For world history, how far back? I remember when I was in, we started ancient Sumer, right? We marched, civilization. Are we still following that? How does?
So in 6th grade, it is ancient civilizations, and then they're called second wave influence civilizations. So Greece and Rome, Persia, pretty much up to the fall of the Roman Empire. And then what we see in the geography focus history course at the freshman year, which is world history and geography, they could pick up in the year 1200. And so you'll see that if kids choose that sequence, they'll have the world history from the year 1200 on to about World War II. Just fast.
There's a lot of skips in.
There's a lot of that one is definitely clustered around themes that we look at within it. And we purposefully start in the year 1200 so we can focus on what the world was like before we have like global exchanges really begin after 1492.
All right, thank you.
So the questions that both Mr. Lack and Mr. Lentz asked kind of crystallize what I'm getting at is we're going to be kind of starting with the baseline starting next year, but we need to have a way to compare this current curriculum to that future curriculum. And given that there are going to be changing standards, and usually standards are modified as opposed to wholesale change. Where those standards are similar, do we have a way to compare what's going on now?
Well, as part of the PLC process that we're in right now, we are deconstructing those standards as they are. And there's some similarities. So most definitely, I mean, we can look at whichever ones are the same and look at student data, which we've been doing throughout the course of this year in our PLC process and kind of compare it to what it will be next year. So yeah, absolutely with those ones that we have.
That's pretty much what I mean. It's kind of teasing out the things that are common from the past to the future.
Yeah, I mean, like Monica said, there are some slight differences, even with ones that look the same. They might have added a couple of words, a couple of phrases that might make it slightly different, but there's still some similarity there.
Well, right, and that's kind of what I'm. Yeah, these are not those. They never are.
There's, and I think to what Mike was saying, the PLC process has changed how we've collected data at the high school level. And so now we collect our common assessments are measuring our priority standards, but we didn't necessarily have the same priority standards with the previous curriculum as well. So we might have shifted to like, this is the standard that we're talking is the priority now as we revise with this new knowledge and understanding. So even if the standard only changed by phrases, it might not have been the whole focus before, but maybe now it is, if that makes sense.
Well, no, and I understand that's the reason for the increased phraseology. I understand
Yeah.
that. What I'm trying to get at is what we've done historically. And I don't want to lose that, and I don't want to lose the ability to compare that with what we're doing moving forward. Because we have to know whether or not $880 million or $1,000 has been spent. Well,
So I have a couple of different questions, some for the team as a whole, some for Dr. Gould. It's clear in the AP case for the AP psychology course that the course test, capstone test for that course has changed, and therefore the alignment of the textbook has to match that test. Is it fair to say that most of the recommendations that you're putting forward here are in place because the state standards are changing? So that the material that you're suggesting that the district buy now aligns with the refined set of state standards. Is that about right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
This is the question for you, Dr. Barrel, too. How much additional funding is the state providing to D303 or other districts like ours that are forced to comply with these changes in the state standard or to react?
Yeah, I think you know the answer. None.
Did I hear that rightly? Is it zero?
It is zero.
I
It is
understand.
zero. It is another unfunded state mandate that this state and many others enjoy doing. But yes, there are no additional dollars that will follow this at the local level has to pick this up and to incorporate it into our standards and making all the significant changes that this team so eloquently described to you. Thanks.
So I appreciate, and part of the reason I bring that up is appreciate the burden that the administration faces and that the team faces in seeking to drive a change. And recognizing that the goalposts have changed from the state's perspective and that our measurements therefore of success therefore have to change. It doesn't alleviate the responsibility that we have for spending well this $1 million. I just wanted to point out more for the community than anyone else that the change is being driven by the state in large part. Now, there may be positive student outcomes, but the bulk of our conversation here was not about student outcomes, it was about compliance. And we have to trust that the standards are developed in a way that will drive positive student outcomes or growth in student outcomes. But we didn't discuss that here today very much.
I would concur with you, your statements. I believe the piece that we're excited about the change throughout the whole organization are the consistent common assessments that will be coming to the board and to working with our teachers, most importantly, about as we have these priority standards and as we continue to assess them over time, those will be the documents that we'll bring to the board for that measurement of success. But you're correct. We don't have to lean into last year's data or previous year's data. Even a slight change in the standard moves the needle on the assessment. So you're not assessing the same thing. So that it's biggest worry of any type of assessment that we're showing anybody apples to tangerines and then being able to try to qualify that through some narrative becomes incredibly challenging and quite honestly almost throws out the data set. I believe the best way for us to measure this is through our common assessments, each of those units, when they're completed, that we see the growth over our priority standards and bringing back the team to really talk through what have they learned? What are they seeing? Where are we at with our student learning? But your points are incredibly valid. Thank you.
And I think we should note that most of the mandates that come from the state land in social studies.
I'd love just as an ask to Christine and the team, I'd love to see some examples of the perspective vision, right, of the history thing, right? So like a historical event, what are we teaching for it, right? How are we incorporating those different perspectives? What does that look like? Just so that I can digest it and get a better understanding of it. That's what be an ask for you. Thank you.
If you wanna, I want to acknowledge that it is a significant amount of money. And that, but we were part of that field test process was to ensure that what we were purchasing wasn't just aligned per se by the publisher telling us it was aligned, but that we took it apart. We made sure it was aligned. We made sure that the materials actually were user friendly. Sometimes you can sell something that isn't user friendly. And it doesn't acknowledge. I just want you to know that we were very cautious about that to make sure that we made good decisions and that we assured that the decision that we made was something that we could continue to use, was highly aligned, and that the output really around, and you saw us add some supplemental materials around the need for complex, rigorous tests. I just think I want to acknowledge that, yes, that's an issue, but we did try to be as cautious as we could be.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think there's there's increased value if the state decides in its infinite wisdom to shift away from SAT and towards ACT as a future measure of high school success, that we're in an even more critical position. I appreciate it.
Great discussion there, board. Appreciate those questions. I think you mentioned it during the presentation. When was the last time these standards were changed at the state level?
2016.
2016. So about an 8-year period. We should be safe with the 6-year deal here.
Yes, I believe we will be fine.
Thank you for the qualifier.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'll echo the sentiments. Thanks for the presentation. Really thorough process. We can tell, obviously, this is a board that's very concerned about outcomes, student outcomes, and seeing that student improvement. So we'll love to hear more about how we're assessing that baseline. And then naturally, we want to see improved student performance, just like every single person in this room. I was particularly happy to hear that you all felt that this process was much more thorough, and refreshing was even a word that was used. Nice to see that stakeholders are weighing in. You're letting other people's voices be heard. I think personally, that's one of the best ways to avoid unforeseen errors. And then lastly, the pyramid image, I really appreciated that as well. We've heard from this board over the last several years, I would say, understanding that top-down approach, right? 12 down to K, outcome driven, right? What is the outcome that we want, and how do we work backwards from that to ensure that each and every grade level, we've talked about that ad nauseum in our committee meetings and as we're planning for these. So it's really nice to see that. And as I've said to Paul before, we like to see that in all areas of study. So I appreciate that. Any other questions, comments from the board? Thank you for your time. Okay, we'll let some shifts occur right here. That was item 2A. We'll be moving on to item 2B, which is French resource recommendations, also grades 6 through 12.
Good evening. My name is Dan McFerrin. I am one of the teachers in special assignment here in the district as well. This is my 8th year in the district, and I actually came from East as a former Spanish teacher. You will see several similarities tonight between the French presentation as well as the social studies presentation. It's one of the many benefits of Monica and I sharing an office is we get to collaborate closely on a lot of projects. Tonight, I'm here to share the curriculum process to date for French, our professional learning plan and next steps, as well as a resource recommendation. As we begin with the planning stage of the CAI process, I'd like to focus on the vision that we engaged in and that we built as a collaborative piece of work that really helped set the foundation for our work last school year and this school year. I'd like to take a moment and really recognize and acknowledge these educators that are on the screen, their time and their passion in helping create a unified 612 world language vision. They poured a lot of time and effort and energy into this. And while they aren't able to be with us here tonight, I always wanted to spend a moment just. In the planning stage during the 2022-2023 school year, the World Language CAI team, which was comprised of both French and Spanish educators, really engaged in shared learning surrounding evidence-based practices through articles and book studies. We deepened our understanding of our standards. And we also developed, as I mentioned, that comprehensive 612 world language vision for all languages and courses here within the third grade as offered at our secondary buildings. Our last piece of our work last school year was also conducting a gap analysis. Within our vision, it's really centered around this idea of evidence-based practices and the role and purpose of learning languages and the benefit that that provides, not only in the moment, but also post D303. Our vision, as social studies also explained, will really help communicate with our stakeholders what we feel is important and valuable and what our evidence-based practices are to help guide our instructional practices within our curriculum and our professional learning. It also helps really articulate a common vision for our students to support their post-secondary goals, and whatever they may choose after with our vision in mind, we conducted a gap analysis in which we analyzed our instructional practices, our world readiness standards, which are our state standards. And we also looked at assessment data, which included the Apple exam, which we widely use for the seal of evaluation here in the district. The team identified various pieces of strengths and opportunities for growth. Some of the celebrations that we noted was the increase in the number of students earning the seal of literacy, both in the languages offered here in the district and also recognizing the home languages that students speak and bring with them as assets. We've started to offer additional language testing in that so they can earn the seal of literacy. While we had several celebrations, we also wanted to look at our opportunities for growth. Our main opportunity really focused on the idea of continuing to ensure alignment using our priority standards to help students reach not only high levels of learning, but advanced language skills as well to be able to achieve on that seal of literacy, for example, and receive post-secondary credit or college credits, depending on their school. We also identified a need to adopt high-quality instructional materials, as Dr. Igo had mentioned earlier, to really forming that foundation and that base of our curriculum to help us support those goals, and creating input-rich environments using level-appropriate materials. And when I talk about an input-rich environment, I'm really talking about the variety of reading and audios or video resources that we use in our classes to provide access to and grow students' interpretive reading listening skills. We recognize that input leads to output, so we want to increase that input to increase output. This year, as we shifted into this year, really thinking through that vision and that gap analysis, we focused on identifying and field testing high quality instructional resources in French 1, 2, and 3, which will help ensure our guaranteed and viable curriculum. As a note, French 4 and 5 will engage in a similar process next school year, but we'll see later in the presentation. These are all of our French educators within the district. I'd like to take a moment and acknowledge each one of them by asking them to stand if they are in attendance. Okay. They did a lot of exceptional work and they persevered. And when I look at our strategic priorities and commitments about perseverance, they really embody that as educators. They were willing to do the hard work and really be involved in it. And I really appreciate each and every single one of them. I'd also like to highlight the systematic and collaborative process of that field test itself. As Andy and Mike alluded to in social studies, the field test process is very new for us within the district, especially for the high school. It allowed us to have a better understanding of the resource and how it really works with students and staff. Had we chosen a resource just with the vendor presentation, we would have found that we would not be recommending that resource. We would have found that resource is not the one that we are ultimately recommending. There are some pretty serious gaps within that piece. And really to ensure teacher voice, every French teacher was invited and invited into the CAI process and the field test process. And I'm really happy to say that every single French teacher in the district joined us this school year for our CAI process and the field test at both Bradley Thompson and Easton. So I'm really excited. This includes every single level of French that we offer as well. In our educator-led field test, we used a resource rubric which really focused on our standards, instructional planning and supports, the instructional materials, as I mentioned earlier, that range of inputs, really focusing on that piece, our assessments to make sure that we had high quality assessments that would help us with our priority standards, and our PLC process, and organization sources also very important for us. Through the use of the rubric and our revision and method of analysis priorities, educators chose which resources to field test. This image will look very similar to social studies. I want to highlight that as we began our field test process, we initially only planned to do 2 different field tests. We ended up shifting to 3 different field tests after our debrief. To really help meet the needs of our teachers and staff, we found that the first 2 resources, as Amy and Mike and Monica alluded to, did not meet our needs. We wanted to make sure that this was a teacher-led process to make sure that it was going to meet their needs and help support students. For each field test, teachers engaged in professional learning from the vendor as to the embedded pedagogy and our overview of print materials, as well as the digital platform. PLCs worked collaboratively and crossed river to determine the unit that they were going to field test. Within our field test, we collected several pieces of information, both from students and staff. This included evidence of student learning as part of the PLC process. That is, that really through the PLC process, we were able to work hand in hand with the resource and with each other to make sure that they were going to meet our needs and our student needs. We also then, for that PLC process, used strategies embedded in the resource to respond to student learning. So we were able to take data from our field test and use those interventions to respond to these. Educators also collected evidence from larger assessments that came from the resource. Department chairs, ISCs, and administrators were also invited into the process to bid our reflections to support the test. At the end of each field test, as I mentioned, we came together to work really collaboratively through a consensus building process using evidence to make a decision. And this is the recommendation. For next school year, though, this recommended resource will help support our ongoing work as we move into that piece. For French A through 3, this summer we will finalize our scope and sequence, which will include our end of unit or common end of unit assessments and final exams that are aligned with our priority standards. The team will also engage in professional learning to the resource and curriculum. Next school year, unit launches will incorporate that job embedded professional learning for each course and each unit that Monica was referencing. We'll follow a very similar format in social studies also. We'll also partner with our administrators to support the ongoing work within the buildings to help them become the instructional leaders that we want. And we'll continually gather feedback from educators and review student work as a leadership team to help make improvements and be able to refine the curriculum. Next year, we will also look at our French 4, 5, and AP. AP will be evaluating resources. In French 4 and 5 will follow a similar process to identify resources for field test, bring those forward for board approval, and create those plans. In future years, we'll also leverage the PLC process and our PLCs to engage in professional learning to help support new educators as they're hired. The PLC process will be a critical and crucial piece for us as we move forward. So we talked about the consequences.
So thinking about the cost, very similar to what you saw from social studies at the 612. And it really does take, well, it's the French books 1 through 3 that are split between A and B. And a carryover, it's a 6-year again proposal. So we paid once, and it's good for 6 years. As well as you'll then see that we've included the unit writing that occurs over the summer. Once that resource has been approved, as well as the launches. And then also providing some additional training as it relates to that modified oral proficiency. So that again, just making sure that we're all up to date and we all understand how each of those pieces. Yeah. We are recommending that this can move forward in regards to our resource. And when we think about how can we manage, we can compare one to the next. We have the ability to use our Apple data as well as our AP data. And then we'll also be able to use our formulas or our end of unit to inform us from time to time. And we're happy to answer any questions.
I have one. What is the timeline for looking at curriculum for our other world languages?
We are in the process of doing Spanish. I'll let Dan talk to that currently. We're still working for a resource. So go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. We brought forward a recommendation for German back in 2020. And then our Spanish for Heritage Week, of course, was in 2022. Currently, our Spanish field test team is in their second field test. And we are hoping to, and we will be able to bring more information to that once the team has made a recommendation. But they're in the process of doing it.
Would be to have one, probably won't be at this point in time for next school year, but we'll continue the process through next year. It's really important to us that we don't just pick a resource and move forward, but that we pick a resource that teachers have used, they are successful with, because we are asking that to be at the center of what they do. And so we are being very careful and cautious to make sure that we choose the right resource and not to make a quick decision that ultimately might not be meet our needs.
Did you say we're in our second field test for Spanish?
Correct. Spanish, engaged in the first field test in about the February-March timeline. They found that that resource did not meet their needs. So they're engaging in the second field test, just right after spring break. They engaged in professional learning with the vendor for that field test, and they actually just all started, if not last week, today.
Another follow-up question. So are we moving to a 6-year cycle for all of our curriculum? Is that kind of the baseline we're using?
Yes, that is really our hope. It doesn't always work quite that nicely, but that allows us, by the time we do 3 years of implementation, a couple of years to sustain, that really gives us enough data for us to know whether we need to restart and start over, if there's been any new standards that we need to. It also makes sure that we're constantly checking in on evidence-based practice, but that if there's anything big that would require significant work, that gives us enough time. We would start that work 2 years before the 6-year cycle is up so that we can make the change.
So in the past, there was a document that was shared with the board that identified all of our classes, curriculum, and where they were at in the timeline. Do we still maintain something like that?
We do have a document like that I'd be happy to share.
Yeah, thank you.
I just have a question regarding really less about curriculum and staffing. This past year, we've had some difficulty with staffing. French, are we staffed from? Doesn't matter what the curriculum is, if you don't have somebody to present it.
I can look into that, and Dan, unless you know our French outlook.
I can speak currently to what we have. We have currently 6 French teachers in the district. One is through the school year. We have weight loss for us. But I believe right now we will be able to staff for all of our for the school year.
And the reason I ask is I know that some are taking this Vietnam language facility. That's not acceptable.
I'll look into it and I'll put it in the weekly update unless we have other information from the team.
So now we remedy that situation and next year, French in 8th grade.
Thank you. It's good news to hear.
I have a question about the literacy certificate. I heard that it's just a little thing that it's on the diploma. Is there anything we can do to make that a little more? This isn't even like I could have called you tomorrow, but I think it's something that is pretty remarkable, and I don't know if they do, awards or something on it that would recognize that these are students who have accomplished the seal. Yeah, did I say something?
So no, you didn't. So it's a sticker currently, at least for North. I can't say, I don't know for East, but. Okay.
I believe the statute requires that a seal of sorts is placed not only on the diploma, but also on the transcript as well, to acknowledge their work, and their level of learning inside. And one of the nice things about that, so this is in case, is that students, if they're in the field of literacy and they attend a public university or a community college here in Illinois, they receive college credits as part of it for their language. They have to seek that out on their own, but they do receive that college credit.
We have resources that are helping our students that have achieved this. Like I know we've talked previously about like helping them, get the credits, other things like that, but is that part of our process to say, hey, we know the population, right? We know the population in French, right? We know that they're gonna get the sticker on their thing. Are we proactively saying, hey, when you're applying or when you're doing X, you need to make sure to seek this out?
Our department chairs are very involved in the field of biliteracy. They really help lead that work at the building level. They can work more behind the scenes in terms of making sure we're all set up for education and pushing and whatnot. But our department chairs are really at helping students understand not only the benefits of the seal of biliteracy, but then also what are the next steps after.
Thank you.
So we have more than 80% of the high school students in the district consistently in their families report that they have a goal of going to college. How will the language vision that you've shared in this specific French resource help those students and those families have their students matriculate into the colleges of their choice?
In our work as a CAI, we looked at the entrance requirements of various universities ranging from highly selective and ranging downward in terms of their selectivity. And what we really identified was the more selective the university, they really wanted 4 years of a language. And now that varied depending on the major, of course, that they were going to enter into, but really helping give them high levels of rigorous coursework to show that they not only can perform well in French, which it needs to be, but that then as they earn the college credit, that's essentially some dollars saved towards a minor, perhaps a major as well, that they can then leverage into their post-degree programs.
Yeah, I appreciate that answer. Thank you. I think one of the things that I keep thinking about is that the measure of success may be the count of students or the percentage of students enrolled who achieve the seal of biliteracy. We can benchmark that today, and we can look at it in the future. A related point, I think, is there is an opportunity to talk about language in middle school and language in high school and how those universities think about middle school language versus high school language, and the recognizing the rising level of difficulty that's true. Every time you move up one of those numbers in the language, it's a little bit more difficult. And the implication on grades and grade point average of students challenging themselves versus the learning value of early language acquisition, meaning the sooner we do it, the better. And so one of the things that I'm hopeful that the team's looking at is the progression from middle school language into high school language and how we instruct students to make that hard decision about reaching for greater levels of proficiency or challenge versus potential impact on grade point average versus what those selective and very selective colleges weigh in terms of courses taken, but scores earned. And so we haven't spoken a lot about that. We haven't yet spoken about the measures of student success. And so we talk about the cost proposal. It's not yet clear to me what the student impact proposal is here, either on college entrance, counts of seals of biliteracy, or proficiency in language for those students, and how we instruct those students to make trade-offs between that complexity. And so I'd like to see some of that discussion when we talk about this again.
And I feel like there's just the other feedback that I've had as you're thinking about like visions, even for this one and moving forward. I think it's important, regardless of the subject, that there's something in the vision related to their college and career pathing as well. You articulated it very well in terms of the benefits of that. And I think that if it's in the vision as well, then I think it's more front and center, whether you're in middle school or high school. So that would just be my comment.
And I feel the obligation to say that it is a loss to not having, less at the elementary level. Maybe in the future, there'll be a board that will find a way to make that happen again. Let's feel that opportunity is a loss. Remember that we do have two-way program that is set to start.
Yeah, so Mrs. Fairgrave, that's a perfect transition. to the
Just a
question.
reminder, that is not two-way next year.
Correct.
It's going to be two-way at some future point, and I hope to see it. I waited 13 years for it to happen before, and I hope it happens this time.
I appreciate the comments. I believe the target is for the 2025-26 school year. But for next year, that's correct. We will continue with the same dual language program that we have had.
Just perfect to go into my question. I know we're talking about French resources here, but Dan, you brought up the Spanish process. It gave me,
Your radio sound.
so I think that's near the K-12 or 12. So how will our one-way, current one-way dual language program, future two-way dual language program, how would that feed into that whole experience from K-12 perspective? Even though I know it's a specific site and not district-wide. My mind started thinking a little bit about, well, we can reverse engineer that process based off of, again, the desired outcome at the end state. Can we expand a little bit on that? I know we're going to go off topic.
One of the pieces that is kind of missing from our dual language program when we originally started was to think about how do I build it like K-12 perspective. And it's really kind of focused in. And so we've been working to work backwards, if you will, and we have some pathways we'll be bringing forward in which we are thinking in terms of where is it we would like our students to land. Really, it's with that seal of literacy. And what does that mean for students through that process? So that is coming because we also are building that two-way. We'll also have that same conversation about what does that look like and what does it feel like. The pathways will probably be very similar, but we will continue to build that out.
Mr. Kuchar, it's a great question. My previous district, it was a game changer in that district. It was a K-8 district. So working with our high school district, our students were more prepared and to be jumping into higher level courses than they had ever seen before. But once that group of students who moved all the way through the system, it really was a game changer for the high school district that we fed into. So there are many conversations that happen. So that's why I appreciate what Dr. Igo said, that we're thinking about it now, that we know when those students arrive to East or North, that we're prepared for them because they will look different. They absolutely will look different.
And we have been working very closely with kids that are currently in middle school or moving up into middle school, like looking at those Apple scores, making those decisions, identifying where they would go. Like, so we're very much into the process of making sure that we have the pathway for the students we are currently serving, and then thinking, and then how do we make this sustainable for everybody?
Last little technical question that I had as I was reviewing kind of the briefing of this presentation, I noticed and I appreciated that there was discussion about comparable and aspirational districts and the resources that they had used. And so when I drilled down a little bit further, it appears a number of them use teacher created resources. Others use what appears to be comparable resources that we're looking to implement here. So I guess the question is, how helpful was that review of the aspirational districts? Were we able to get some insights from that? Did we arrive at something similar or identical to any of those districts?
One of the pieces really that I'd like to highlight about the world language community within Northern Illinois, and really in general, is we are a very close-knit community that we collaborate a lot, we talk a lot. When I was on the phone with department chairs on our aspirational and our benchmark districts, comparables, it's not a, hello, my name is Dan McCarran. It's, oh, hey, how are you today? So we really have this close-knit relationship with each other, and we're able to share information back and forth. One of the things that we found in our field test process as we were identifying for resources, there's just not a whole lot out there for French. There's a lot for Spanish, not a lot for French. And really being able to have those conversations with our benchmark districts and those department chairs and really thinking through what is it that works well, what isn't, that maybe are some pieces that they had to really work through to make that resource work for them has really been a powerful piece for us, and bringing that to the team as well to help them understand what are some of the pieces that if we were to choose this resource, what is that? And then to answer your second question, the resource that we provided the recommendation for, reported on our phone, is a communicative approach. So really focusing on input to get output, high levels of language production. Many of our comparable and inspirational districts are using a very similar process with their teacher created resources. However, there is something nice to be said about having a core foundation for all of our courses cross river, that if I'm French A at Thompson, it's going to be the same curriculum as French A. Or whether it's at the high school course as well for the students.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it. Any other comments, thoughts here? Okay, thank you so much for your time. Okay, we'll do a little bit more shuffling here and we'll be moving on to item 2C, science resource recommendations, again, grades 6 through 12.
Matt and Natalie, our department chairs from East and North, are going to come up and share with you our CAA process. And I think what's really important here, and I will absolutely come out in their presentation this evening, is really that, again, this idea that it's very important we find the correct resource and that we aren't willing to settle. And you're going to hear a little bit about what that looks like.
Good evening. I hope you've seen tonight that what's different from the Learning and Teaching Department is that we have a process that's applied systematically in all content areas, and including high school this year, have seen some significant changes in the process, including the field test. So tonight I'd like to talk about the work of the team for high school curriculum assessment and instruction team. Again, you're going to see a similar presentation because we're using the same process. We'd like to recognize our science teachers that supported the process, and also our administrators and the support of learning and teaching. Anyone here from? Oh.
Thanks, Lisa.
And our assistant principal, Mrs. Dandry, who was instrumental in moving this team forward this year. I really want to recognize her work there. So this year we were in the designing phase of the process, and our team identified priority standards at the beginning of the year, including also working on our vision and taking that vision and priority standards to look for core and supplemental resources to field test. Part of our vision was to engage in the alignment of the 3 dimensions of science, so those science and engineering practices, our disciplinary core ideas, that's the content of science, and our cross-cutting concepts. An additional part of our vision that was very important to the team was to think about those pathways and post-secondary experiences for students in our vision. We wanted to ensure that every student in the district had access to rigorous science content, so that upon graduation from D303, every student would be scientifically literate. That's an important to participate in our democracy and to make good decisions, we need to be scientifically literate. Now, for students who are interested in science, we wanted to guarantee an accelerated pathway that would give them greater access to post-secondary credits and AP courses, so that they could get to highly selective colleges with, if not one, more than one AP credits in science. So then we took all the learning that we did together, and we looked at our current reality, our assessment data on the Illinois Science Assessment, and also our current resources, and identified some gaps in our curriculum resources. The first gap was the need for 3-dimensional alignment, not only in instructional resources, but actually in instructional activities in our classrooms. A need that has been identified across the district and high schools, the need for complex and above above grade level text. And that came from data not only on the ISA, but also on our SAT. All of the teachers recognize that to truly be three-dimensionally aligned, we need our instruction to be based in phenomena. So real world things that students are interested in. Why are there more wildfires now? Why do things rust? Questions like that then we can dig in and learn about the science. And then to do all that, we need aligned, rigorous, three-dimensional assessments. So just a quick overview of the process. This team actually started in the old CBT process. And then this year we've been transitioning to our new process. The team started with professional learning on the standards and the Illinois Science Assessment with Dr. Carol Baker. She's an NGSS writer and an expert in science assessment in Illinois. The team developed a vision, and then this year we were able to field test two high-quality resources, Cognigy and HMH into science. And also we were able to look at a supplemental science assessment resource that would meet our need of three-dimensionally aligned assessments. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Rosine from North High School, the Department Chair for Science, who will tell us about our field tests.
Yes, like you've heard from world language and from social studies, the field test is definitely a new piece that's in the CAI process, and one I think that is very integral in ensuring that we get the right resource and put it in the hands of our teachers to then help us be able to help our students grow in those three dimensions of science that were mentioned by Tina. The first resource that we looked at was Cognigy. They are one of the things that we looked at was the advantages of having this resource. It is phenomenon based. It does integrate Earth within kind of the three disciplines that we typically look at in biochemistry and physics. They do use a 5E instructional model, which is one that our district is very familiar with and helps us reach a lot of the goals that are outlined in our strategic plan. One of some of the disadvantages that we saw and heard when very similar to some of the other teams that have presented tonight, we looked at teacher surveys throughout this particular field test, student data that was happening. We had people who were involved in our CAI process as well as non-CAI members kind of across the courses that we happen to offer. But the assessments, what we found was that the level of rigor in this particular resource was not going to be where we needed it in order to be able to achieve the outcomes that the district was expecting in our strategic plan. It is also a relatively new resource. It launched in 2022, and so it is still being updated. So this is one that we field tested right when we returned from our winter break. And so we field tested it for kind of the first 4 weeks of 2024, and the CAI team came back with a decision for do not recommend. Then we kind of transitioned from our from this particular resource to another resource that we wanted to try, which was HMH. And so it too, we worked with it for another 4 weeks. So we started in February and finished this particular field test right before spring break. It too has phenomenon based. It has text and digital formats available to us. They both have online text support that was actually available. One of the things that was mentioned earlier is how sometimes vendors come through and actually will say something like this resource is 3D aligned, or this resource offers this, but actually getting into and being provided with a field test to really see that even though this particular resource says that it is 3D aligned, that it is very heavy in content, but it tends to be lighter on our science and engineering practices, as well as our cross-cutting concepts. Students and teachers thought that navigation of this resource could be difficult, which is, not something that we want to have happen. And again, the rigor level is not where we want it to be in order to meet our strategic plan outcomes. Because if our outcomes are such that eventually we get to common cross-river assessments
at East and at North High School for our students, no matter what level of science they actually choose to engage in. And then being able to make decisions about what to do or how to be able to help them grow if we need to, or if they're on the accelerated path, how to help enrich them and provide them enrichment opportunities. We need resources that are going to be able to help us make those decisions. And through these two field tests, we came back when the CAI team met right before spring break, what they do not recommend. And so what I'm gonna do now is actually turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Bowman from East to actually talk to us about the one that we are.
All right, thank you for having us back. Appreciate being here. Am I echoing a little bit? No. All right, perfect. Like they both said, by two doctors here, so I'm a little bit undereducated, I suppose. We in good faith could not ask this board, this community to pay for something if we didn't feel like it was the best. I think we've heard this tonight with the other two, like that is a definite measure we're measuring against, and the entire team, East and North, did truly feel that neither one of these resources is really going to take us there. It was not a pleasant moment to get to that, but it was a true one, and we could not bring it forward to this board and ask for either one of those approvals. Then what happened, I think a few weeks ago, is that you guys got an instruction on a K-5 resource for testing called Inner Orbit. That was brought to our team as well. We were asked a little bit about to dive into it, and it was basically like godsend for us. All of a sudden, like, oh, there are assessments for NGSS, and we finally found something that had sort of had that foundational piece. That was missing from the other two resources almost entirely. We cognitively had a really good feel for kind of a flow and a sequence to go into it, but it was really progressive, really out. There was a huge dynamic shift from where we were, which is not a bad thing, but the assessments were so lacking, we couldn't even figure out what the kids would know by the end of it. HMH, much more traditional. Again, even the assessment piece, it was lacking. So then we start looking within our orbit, we're like, well, at least we have something kind of built off of. So just to give a perspective for all of you on here, when we do try to do a resource search, we're actually looking at about 16 total resources versus math, which might find about 60 plus. It's almost a desert in terms of 9-12 resources that are NGSS aligned. It's not totally, but it's really hard to find the best possible one. So our goal was to come forward with all of you and sort of say, well, what do we have? Inner Orbit provides, and I won't bore you with it because I know you guys had an explanation about it already, has what we need to at least get our measures. And I think we've heard a lot tonight that what are the benchmarks? What are we at? How can we guarantee that the changes we're making for kids are actually being beneficial? We hear that. We want that as teachers because we know what's best for kids. This is a step in the right direction for us because this allows us to test, assess, and get data on all three pieces of evidence related to the scientific standard. NGSS is very, very difficult to unpack. One of our colleagues at the middle school, Ms. Megan Chupek, actually went to a conference and sat there for about 3 hours watching a bunch of people writing their dissertation on unpacking an NGSS standard. I'm not kidding. We bought the book so we can read it too. It's very time intensive. It's wrapped inside of performance expectations. It's wrapped inside of content. There's skill based, and then there's also almost a metacognitive lens when you're looking at the cross cutting concepts. Mr. McNeely, sorry for more stuff. I got the science background. To that end, though, it's very hard for us to assess, and it's very hard for us to even know what the kids are being asked. And then couple that with the fact that the Illinois Science Assessment just came into the fruition within the last 2 years because it was in a cycle of almost beta testing. We at least have a baseline to see if these changes will make an impact. We could really look from that and see, okay, well, we don't have a resource just yet, other than our assessment resource we're bringing forward to you now. But if this actually works, and we really do feel passionately about this, we have vertical articulation in terms of assessment. Like we got K-5, we got 6-8, we got 9-12. That's never happened for science that I'm aware of. Dr. Rosine, yeah, I don't need you.
No, it's totally fine. I've been in the district since 1997. I've been on every single CBT process and now CAI process since I walked in the door. We've never had field tests and we have never had vertical alignment. So this could be a huge game changer in the world of science and feel free. That's fine.
Like I said, I'm sorry. So you'll notice in this slide, it went from advantages to disadvantages to just advantages and advantages. That was really because we want to play with it. And we really think that this is something we can do a lot of good work with. To that end, I'm sure there are disadvantages that we're not quite seeing, but I think a lot of them are logistical concerns. We start talking about like how the kid's going to access some of these assessments. How are we going to push these out? That is something we can navigate with building administration, district administration, and make sure that that's not, as far as I'm concerned, like a really big red flag. What is really powerful about these assessments is they are very similar to the Illinois Science Assessment. So you have a phenomenon-based process. You literally search by the standard. And then on top of that, we have the ability to assess prerequisite knowledge for our formative feedback. We have the ability to assess just one-dimensional content. And then it starts to couple the assessments with the skills, the metacognitive, and finally three-dimensional analysis, where a lot of these are tied to rubrics. In fact, one of my colleagues and I just gave one of these assessments on Friday. We got feedback from kids already. It's pretty wild. Like we're getting some really powerful conversations because now we're having to sort of sit down in PLCs and say, well, would you give this a 3 or a 4? When we're looking at these rubrics, we're like, oh, this kid's kind of here. I kind of think that. And so we're having a lot of those powerful PLC conversations via this rubric rather than a teacher generated assessment as we go through. Again, we can go that far. Sorry. So in orbit, that's just a lot of what you guys have seen before. We're really, really excited about the possibility of vertical articulation with this because NGSS is a lot to unpack. Inner orbit essentially does that for us to allow us to kind of see that growth across. And then I believe I'm turning this back over to Tina. Yes.
So here are our plans for the next 2 years in science. The CI team will come back together next fall. We will review our annual assessment data. And then we will begin again vetting resources. Again, we're hoping more resources are available for high school NGSS and learning instruction. And we will field test again in the fall and winter next year. Perhaps we bring a resource to the spring. And then when we move ahead for the 25-26 school year, we will, if we find a resource that's aligned and rigorous, we will be implementing in bio and physics, and then starting a new CAI team to look at honors, electives, and courses in science. Right.
Now, before we jump into the financial impact, I just kind of want to walk us through kind of how inner orbit really helps us. Well, we don't necessarily have the resource, which we know absolutely helps make this process easier. That inner orbit provides us with an end of unit assessment and an end of unit goal that everybody is working for that allows teachers to really do that backwards design. And it doesn't involve teachers writing that assessment. We're using an assessment bank to develop and pull those pieces together. And so while it is not exactly what we want, this really does help provide us with a very strong bank to allow us to work backwards to build that commonality across river in each of those pieces. And then we'll also help inform what is it exactly we need in our resources, because we are going to have information about how kids are responding to that assessment and what is working and what is not working in that assessment. So again, it's not exactly where we want it to be, but this does provide us with a strong framework to still do the work around building that guaranteed 5. So when we think about that financial impact, it looks similar to what we talked about in K-8 in terms of the 1-year subscription. And then again, also in terms of looking at that professional learning, making sure that teachers know how to use that, utilize that resource, give those assessments, choose the correct questions, and then come back together and make sure that we're utilizing the same standards to evaluate. That's what that professional.
I wondered how, and this may just be an assumption on my part, it's not accurate. Will there be a tendency to say, oh, we can make our own curriculum? Now that we have an assessment that tells us what kids know and what they need to know, will we find ourselves going, okay, so we can build our own units?
That is not our goal.
I know, but this is the goal.
Yeah, that is not, I can never say never, because we absolutely need to be responsive. And you just saw that the publishing field is catching up to the NGSS But our goal, we will continue to look and we will continue to fine tune. Because it is extremely important that we have that high quality instructional material at the base, at the foundation, for many reasons, but just while this assessment is one step in the right direction, without the resource, we could find ourselves starting to split.
One thing though that you can see is that in middle school, we had an implementation in 2020 of a high quality three-dimensional aligned resource. Is that when we had three-dimensional assessments, learning about those assessments changed our instructional practices and revealed to us the things that we didn't know and the things that we needed to change in our classroom. And I believe that we will go through that same process using Renewal Orbit, because we have a vision now of the end goal. So if a student can achieve this performance expectation, what does that mean in a three-dimensional sense? And Renewal Orbit will show us that, and that walking into those actions will begin to change some of our beliefs.
But question in terms of in terms of resources, what are our aspirational and benchmark schools using? Did we look at that in there?
Yeah, so we did, we can definitely provide it for you if you'd like to see it. The short answer is everything all over the place. It is the wild, wild west in terms of NGSS. No one's quite sure how to do it, and it's been out for 10 years. So it's kind of strange to that nature. One of my friends that works up in Stevenson is one of the assistant department chairs up there. They literally started from scratch, are almost not using any kind of written resource. And in their PLCs, they have called the bucket method, where they take a 3-base skill and they sit down in their PLC and make brand new formatives and summations every single year. Bucket method. They're also standards-based grading, so I don't think we want to go into full development with that right there. But he gave me an example, and he's like, we can't even sell this to people or give it to people because it's just so different every single year. Comparably, Geneva has more of a traditional method where we're kind of looking at, all right, here's content, let's assess on the content. A lot of it's changing as we speak, and it's really being leveraged by that Illinois science assessment. I know it's a small percentage of the school report card right now, but in the next coming years, we've been in professional development where the measures for what's considered proficient is going to increase. So the state average right now is pretty high for that assessment, and we're doing great as a district, but we don't want to get caught off guard.
And then my other question, where does the lab come in? And are you at some point also looking at that in terms of the content and just that whole process?
We will absolutely be having that conversation, and when we talk a little bit about that high school experience kind of next month, we'll be talking about how we need to take a look at, while we need that time to meet those needs. There, as we've looked at other schools, there are different ways in which to get to that goal. And so we'll have some opportunities to have some conversations. They've approached it in a different way. Each schools have just approached it differently.
And I think even when we look at the graduation requirements for science, NC has changed those. So now you're required to have 2 labs per week to be considered a lab course. So that'll be a change in our curriculum assessment instruction process. To look at the redesign of these courses.
How does it change? Do we require more or less, or?
I believe we have less now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Specific to inner orbit, how do you anticipate the continued contribution to inner orbit once a recommended set of resources is brought to this table?
Don't know yet, to be in total transparency. That's probably the word I'm looking for. It will really depend on what resource we land with and what kinds of assessments are within that. And if they meet the needs, if we find that this is really where it is. This might be what we continue to do to utilize for our resources. But until we have a resource and we can compare it next to the assessments, it's really difficult to say. Try to keep an open mind.
Yeah, so maybe we'll continue to use it. That's what I hear you saying.
Yeah.
And if I look at the slide 15, we have a $50,000 one-year subscription. Would we expect that would be a continuing cost? Meaning we pay that subscription every year we use it. Okay. So when I think about that, I look at the 58,000 And professional learning is the only potential stranded cost. And as the team points out, that's hardly a stranded cost because the folks who go through professional learning have taken with them some real content development. So just from a risk standpoint, the risk is we don't select inner orbit again. We select some other resource that has a different assessment methodology behind it. Is that about right?
To address Mrs. Cape's concern or question I have regarding that. If people are creating their own, what causes people to do that is lack of user friendliness and inability to integrate with current grade book systems and things like that. That's when teachers say, forget it, I can't do this. They start doing their own thing. So that brings me to that question. How is the integration with our gradebook system and how is, what about user friendliness?
And all of it is rostered through ClassLink, so students have access to it with one click. We accomplished that in 3 days. With all of the high school, all the middle school, and all the elementary schools in the entire district rostered through ClassLink. It's very user friendly. The teacher creates the assessment. I can create an assessment and push it out to everyone in the entire district. So we are all taking the same assessment. The teachers find it right in their library, and one click assign it to students. The data dashboard is very user friendly, and one thing that we're excited about is we can measure the progress of the science and engineering practice across the district. 5th grade, 8th grade, 11th grade, all the years that we're assessing on the Illinois Science Assessment. So the dashboard, district-wide dashboard will be accessible and easy to use.
I know we're not recommending Cognigy or HMH, but do you recall what the cost was? And was that another 6-year term? Presuming that we find something similar or comparable down the road?
I don't think we even went that far as to ask them for a quote because it didn't.
I do have
Oh,
I
you
always
do?
ask before we start. So HMH would have been over $300,000 just for high school. Cognitive was much less. It was a per student cost, $10 per student. But that was just a digital package that did not have any print resources, any science materials, any consumable supplies. So all of those things they would have to purchase.
Any other questions, thoughts, feedback? Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate you being here. Moving right along here, as we shift again, we will be going into item 2B, music resource renewals, this one for grades K through 5.
Don't get to me yet. Okay. This is a resource renewal for Quaver. It did not make it into our resource renewals in March L&T because we didn't have a quote yet from the company. This is a resource that was previously approved by the board in 2018. This is our guaranteed and viable curriculum for elementary music, general music classes. And what you have in front of you in the board memo is the cost for Quaver for the next renewal cycle.
This is a 5-year license, correct? So clearly it would seem we think this is an effective resource. Renewing it.
To know how effective it was, the teachers been contacting me since September. When are we going to get Quaver? We need to make sure we get Quaver. Please don't let Quaver go by the wayside. Please remember Quaver. So we got the quote, and I'm sorry it didn't make it into the resource in March, but we will have the teachers next year.
Seems like a little mini CAI process there, right, from the teachers and soliciting, so good to hear. If nothing further, I think we'll move on to item 2E.
Before we jump into that, I just want to express my sincere gratitude for all of the educators who worked countless hours, gave feedback through all of the multiple processes the board you heard about this evening. This was a huge undertaking of time, effort, the thoughtfulness, the care. I appreciate where science is at And I think to some previous public comment, where individuals were talking about teachers don't have the voice in D303 on their curriculum. I think tonight is a great example of teacher voice, teachers being instrumental in the process in D303. I could not be more pleased as the superintendent sitting here, hearing how our strategic plan is coming to life, and you see evidence of that work through effective collaboration, through all of these teams coming together and doing this work and being so thoughtful about what is the right resource for our students, driven by that instructional coherence, seeing and hearing that on a regular basis. I could not be more pleased with the collaboration, the thoughtfulness. Mike, Andy, Dan, Matt, Natalie, Tina, and everyone else behind the scenes who's lifting this up. Your time, I could not be more proud of each and every one of you and for the work you're doing for our students. I just thank you. We're going to be a better district because of your work. And I was going to highlight, I appreciate the hard conversation that science had to have. Because I believe in many districts, we would have had a curriculum here tonight. I really do. And I think it's a testament to the leadership of L&T. It's a testament to the department chairs and our teachers and others who worked on it to say, no, this isn't good enough. This isn't good enough for D303 students or our staff to reject. And like, okay, we know next fall, we're going back into this. We're going to figure this piece out, but coming out with a high quality assessment tool that's going to guide our work. So from the superintendent, I'm just incredibly proud of the work that's happening. Dr. Ago, Tina, thank you for the structure that's been put in place. It is evident that the field testing is actually doing what we need it to do, putting it in the hands of our educators for our educators to say, this works or this doesn't, or this needs to be tweaked, as we saw referenced early on. Well, we're going to need some supplemental materials. We wouldn't know that without it being in the hands of our teachers, because I know this will be a shock to everybody, but not every textbook salesperson is shooting a script. Everything they say is every textbook can solve every one of our school district problems. It's just not true. And I just appreciate the thoughtfulness of all of you and what you're doing. But again, the amount of time and energy that goes into this is immense. So thank you. Dr. Igo.
One moment, I think I forgot a technical thing here. I believe that these 4 items will be going on to consent for May. Pretty good with that? Okay. Thanks. Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Gordon. So there's not a presentation as it relates to kind of this work around the high school experience. We'll be coming back in May and kind of really laying that up. But prior to really digging in, wanted to just kind of like lay out, like, what does the research tell us? What are we finding? And how is that going to inform kind of the decisions or the process that we're going to bring forward? And make sure we have some consensus around the board that, yep, that is the steps that we've learned. And so over the last probably 6 to 8 months, as an L&T team, we've been reviewing research as it relates to kind of those high quality comprehensive high school experience. What does that look like? What does that feel like? What should be included in that? And then auditing not just our experiences, but also what is happening in our comparable districts and our aspirational districts. And when we kind of dig into that research, there's really a couple of big ideas, and I kind of laid them out in that memo, but I want to just kind of hit the big ideas and then happy to answer any of those questions. But really this idea, there's kind of a couple, and one of them is really that as we need to start to transition ourselves away from our goal of preparing students for college and career to preparing and transitioning kids into college and career. And that it's important that we help support kids into that process of transition. And when we talk about that transitioning, it really is about taking some of the work that we do at the high school and moving it down into middle school. And really start that ongoing conversation and communication. And Mr. Lackner talked a little bit about it tonight around the choices and decisions I make in middle school will impact the choices and decisions I will have in high school, which ultimately will impact what my post-secondary options will be. So making sure that we're starting that process early and we're communicating it often, and that people understand how each of those things connect. And really helping our students develop and support them in developing their own individualized four-year plan that's reflective of the post-secondary goals that they've set. And that we've really clearly identified, here is what needs to happen based upon the selectivity of college you would like to go to. You would like to attend a highly selective college. When we talk about highly selective, it's usually a 15% acceptance rate, more or less. These are the courses that you need to take. This is what this needs to look like. As well as also talking about it from what is it you're interested in studying, kind of a STEM approach or a liberal arts approach. And once you kind of know about STEM or liberal arts, you got to kind of take that and then apply that to the type of selectivity of college you want to go to, because that's going to like alter depending on what that looks like. It's really important, for instance, when kids are entering into that STEM, that we have set them up to finish Algebra 2 in their sophomore year, right? And so have we acknowledged that? Have we communicated that? Do parents know and understand that? Do kids know and understand that? So that's kind of that piece around beginning and thinking about that transitioning into that piece. The other kind of big takeaway really is around the idea that we should be thinking about junior year as the end goal for college and career readiness benchmarks. So what have we done to set up those course pathways, those course enrollments, so that kids have had all of the things that they need to hit that college and career readiness benchmark by the end of their junior year? And then we begin to transition and support them by allowing them to have more options for early college credit, whether that's dual credit, whether that's AP, but we start to think about how do we set those kids up who are hitting those benchmarks to move right into those classes. And then kids who aren't hitting those benchmarks, what are we doing? And really rethinking our system of support to ensure that they're ready to hit a credit bearing college course. So kind of thinking from those two lenses. And then I think the other piece kind of really allows us to leverage our K-12 system and really be thinking about this idea that we need to be thinking about literacy and numeracy skills, and that we are growing skills from the minute they enter us to the minute that they leave us, and that we're constantly moving that process forward. And that in that process, we're thinking about what is it that students need? How might I be able to accelerate that process for students at points in time? If not only where can I accelerate it, but where can I build on-ramps? So if I'm going to start a math acceleration process in elementary school, I need an on-ramp in middle school, I need an on-ramp in high school. So that at any point in time, kids would be able to jump in and accelerate their learning. Same thing with ELA. Really rethinking and restructuring our thinking around those AT courses, not just about enrichment, but acceleration. How are we providing kids opportunity to learn more grade levels by compacting and telescoping those curriculum pieces for them? And then finally, redesigning kind of our systems of support. So really making sure that our systems of support are highly aligned to our priority standards, and that they're highly aligned to our college and career readiness benchmarks, and that they're fast and in the moment, and they really build in those acceleration principles that we've talked about. Making sure we're not having kids fill gaps, but thinking in terms of what do you need to access this curriculum tomorrow, so that you are constantly moving those students ahead and forward. And then finally, really rethinking about or redesigning our CTE classes and our programs so that they're supporting our post-secondary workforce readiness act, which really calls for us to think about how we're preparing every single kid for a career. Some students will need to go to college to get to that career. Some students will leave us and move right into that career. Some students will just need some post-secondary responses, but we're thinking about that, and that we're providing kids with multiple opportunities to dig into a career pathway and make some determinations like, yes, this is what I want to do, or no, this isn't what I want to do, right? It is far less expensive to decide I don't like engineering in high school than it is once I've enrolled in college and I'm, so far in. But we need to get really clear with kids about, you try these courses out to see if this is what you want to do. And it's okay to say, this isn't for me, or I'm gonna keep going down this pathway. So really thinking about how we align each of those things. Like, those are kind of the four big ideas. Happy to answer questions.
I'm wondering about the arts. And how they might also be included in these pathways. I'm sure they're, you know, but for a lot of students, music ends, which is good. Maybe there's a little bit, but that might be an interest that they, so I don't know if we do any on-ramping.
In the fine arts.
In the fine
You mean for, I'm thinking you're asking me about band or orchestra. If I choose to not join band in fifth grade, where's the on-ramp for me at high school? Is that what you're asking?
It's something, yes, I'm not, I don't need you to be specific now. I'm just
Okay.
thinking, how do we make sure that kids can have arts and art, literature rich in their thinking, but very skilled and very talented. Do we have those opportunities?
Yeah, that will fall. We'll talk through some of that in our career pathways, right? Like what we're talking about, graphic design. I'm throwing that out there, but that's one of those fine arts that we will show how that fits and builds in. Because that would be in our CTE work.
And one of the pieces that I want to level set, making sure that we have a clarity of where we're coming back in May. We're really going to be talking about the core content first. We really want to make sure that we have this in this part of our house in order. So that's going to be the lion's share of May's conversation. I don't want to set expectations that we're going to go for and all electives for this high school experience. However, we do have that lined up for us to take that on once we have this piece moving forward. Dr. Ago, anything else on that you would?
No, I think when we originally brought that charge statement forward, we had kind of laid out, let's do the cores and then let's move into.
So
Sorry, but I do have comments or feedback around that. I do think in May, though, it would be helpful to whether to have a graphic or something that illustrates what is the end vision for the high school experience. So that's where the fine arts piece would come in. Where does that fit? You know, I am taking my notes. I had 3 different paths for post-secondary readiness. So I think that would be helpful for the board. And then from there, you peel back into the focus system.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So I'm very encouraged and excited to hear about the different on-ramp opportunities, right? We've talked about that a number of times. We've also gotten a lot of feedback from the community about that, right? So, you know, some people missing out on certain things if they don't get it in middle school or other pieces, right? One thing, and again, I know that we have a limited time, right? And our scope is primarily on the core pieces of it. But I would certainly love to hear the gaps that we have identified, right? If we're bringing forward this, you know, hey, we've identified this, you know, research is telling us this is very important. I would love to hear the gaps, right? And that way, then we obviously don't have to solve them when we're reviewing the catalog, but as a board, we can be aware of them and again, you know, put them into the next set of stuff that we have to work with. That's.
I really appreciate your comment there because there are probably some gaps that could be identified that don't require the entire solution in order to be quickly. So I appreciate that point. I would add, we heard tonight 3 of those, at least 2 of those core areas being reviewed, and a third that's really critical for a lot of students in terms of world languages. And so one of the challenges that I think we need to be prepared for is that the resource selection process and the entirety of the review that you have just outlined for us will operate in different time frames. There's something we need. We clearly aren't finished yet with science identification, and there's some others that'll progress, Spanish being another. But one of the challenges I think that for us to discuss in May, at least conceptually, is how do we bring these things together time-wise? Because we know already there have been some courses that were low enrollment. We know there have been changes to science courses. There are all kinds of changes happening concurrent with the redefinition of this high school experience. So how do we think about bringing all those things together in a time so that the investment primarily in teacher time and student experience is harmonized?
We've talked about on ramps, and I think we need to talk about off ramps as well. If somebody follows this and says, "Hey, this engineering is not for me," and given that we're changing the scope of the way high school is kind of flowing, we have people in position to help them and say, "Well, if that's not for you, this is the direction you could go." And Ms. McCabe mentioned, maybe it is steer somebody to find their source, steer somebody in some other direction. At least let them know what their options are. But we need to make sure that we keep that into account as well, because we're going to find people are going to say, "This is not for me." And they need to know, and they need the adult to tell them, these are your options for where to go next.
Hey, great discussion here on all the topics tonight. That brings us to item 3A, future agenda items.
So we will be talking about this at the next meeting for sure, our high school experience. We also will be hearing from the middle school vision committee and the work that they did this year. And I believe we might have an additional resource that we need to bring.
All right, well, I think that is it for the evening. Thanks, everybody. Great discussion, great presentations. We appreciate all the input. And that's item 3B, adjournment at 7:31 PM.